I had worked the closing shift at Murphy's Diner for almost 5 years. It was the kind of small-town joint that smelled like grease and coffee no matter what time of day you walked in, and after midnight, the regulars were mostly truckers or the lonely kind of people who didn't like sleeping. I didn't mind the hours. I liked the quiet after the rush, the way the hum of the refrigerators filled the silence while I wiped down the counters. It was comforting in a strange way, predictable. But that night, something in the air felt off before I even left the diner. Maybe it was the fog that had started rolling down from the ridge, thick and low. Or maybe it was the way the lights outside flickered, like they were fighting to stay on. Either way, I remember feeling like I shouldn't have been alone. By the time I locked up and stepped out back, the alley was swallowed in that heavy Appalachian fog. You couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. The air smelled like wet asphalt and something faintly metallic like blood or rust. I pulled my jacket tight and started down the narrow path between the diner and the laundromat, my boots echoing against the cracked concrete. That's when I saw it. A tall, narrow silhouette at the far end of the alley, standing perfectly still under the flickering streetlight. I froze. It didn't move, didn't shuffle, didn't even sway. Just a black outline, like the shape of a man cut out of the night. At first, I thought it had to be someone waiting for a ride, maybe one of the regular drunks who hung around after closing. So I called out, "Hey, you good there?" My voice came out thinner than I expected, disappearing into the fog. No answer. The figure didn't so much as twitch. I stood there a few seconds longer before shaking it off and continuing down the alley, keeping my eyes forward. But after a few steps, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing behind me. I turned around, but the alley was empty. The fog had swallowed everything beyond a few feet. I told myself it was just the echo of my own steps. Tried to laugh it off, but the sound came again, 2 steps after mine, matching my pace. My chest tightened. I quickened my pace, walking faster until I reached the end of the alley and stepped out onto Main Street. The air felt clearer there, less suffocating, and the lights from the gas station across the road looked warm and normal. I didn't look back. That night, when I got home, I checked every lock twice. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of an old brick building, the kind that creaked when you walked too fast. I turned on the TV just to fill the silence. But as I sat there half watching some rerun, I noticed a dark shape reflected in the glass of my window. It looked like someone standing on the street below, facing the building. I went to the window, but when I looked down, there was no one there, just the fog rolling through town like slow smoke. Over the next few nights, the feeling of being watched never left. I started avoiding the alley altogether, taking the long way home under the brighter streetlights. Still, no matter where I walked, I'd catch glimpses of something, someone, just at the edge of my sight. A shape in a doorway, a figure standing under a flickering light. Once I swear I saw a shadow detach itself from a lamppost as I passed, sliding just a little too slow to be the work of normal light. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe all those graveyard shifts were finally catching up to me. But then things started happening inside my apartment. The first time was small. I woke up in the middle of the night and found my front door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. The second time, I found wet footprints in the hallway, leading from the door to the window. I didn't even own shoes that big. I moved through the apartment with a kitchen knife in my hand, every nerve buzzing, but no one was there. I could still smell that faint metallic scent though, like rain on old iron. It got worse after that. I'd catch it standing across the street, watching. It was always the same, tall, thin, perfectly still. If I looked too long, it would vanish, like it had melted into the dark. But the sense of it didn't leave. It followed me to work, to the grocery store, even when I went to visit my mother 2 towns over. I'd look out the window of her kitchen and see it across the road, half hidden behind a tree. One night I came home from work and found my living room light on. I never left that light on. I stood in the doorway listening. The air inside the apartment felt heavier than it should have, thick and humid, and the smell was stronger this time, metallic and sour. I stepped inside, knife in hand again, and shut the door behind me. The TV was on static. I swear I'd unplugged it that morning. Then, through the hiss of the static, I heard breathing, slow, wet breathing coming from somewhere near the bathroom. I backed toward the door. But before I could reach it, every light in the apartment flickered out at once. For a second, the dark was total. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it, standing in the hall, half lit by the glow from the TV. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was darker than that. Its head tilted slightly like it was studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The air felt sucked out of the room. When I blinked, it was gone. The lights came back. The static stopped. I dropped the knife and sank to the floor, shaking so hard I thought my bones would rattle. After that night, I stopped sleeping. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, packed everything I owned into my truck, and drove 3 towns over to a cheaper place closer to the highway. For a while, it seemed fine. The first night, I slept through without seeing anything. But on the second night, as I turned off the lights, I noticed something strange. The shadow cast by my body on the wall didn't quite line up. It lagged. When I raised my arm, the shadow stayed still for half a heartbeat before following. I froze, staring at it. Then, as if it realized I'd noticed, it turned its head. Not my head, not my movement. Its head. It looked right at me. I screamed and stumbled back, flipping the lights on. The shadow snapped back to normal, but I didn't sleep again that night. Or the next. That was months ago. I've moved again since then, even quit my job at the diner. But it doesn't matter where I go. Every time I walk home at night, I see it again, just at the edge of the light, waiting. Sometimes when I'm alone in a room, I feel the air change and I know it's there, standing just behind me where the light doesn't reach. I've tried telling myself it's in my head, that it's some kind of lingering paranoia. But deep down, I know that's not true. It's not the same shadow every time. It's the same presence, watching, following, patient, and sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, the room's still dark and quiet. I swear I can hear footsteps in the hall again, slow and deliberate, moving closer to my door. I hold my breath and wait for them to stop. They always stop right outside, but last night they didn't. I grew up at the bottom of a hollow just outside Boone County, in a house my father built himself back in the 70s. It sat deep in the trees, a mile off the main road, with a long gravel drive that wound through the woods like a snake. The nearest neighbor was a good 20-minute walk away, and at night the only sounds were the frogs down by the creek and the wind pushing through the pines. For most of my life, that silence made me feel safe. I used to sit on the porch at night with my brother, counting fireflies and listening to the woods settle. That old house was home in every sense of the word. I never thought I'd come to fear it. The first time I heard the footsteps was late one summer night. I was home alone. My folks were visiting my aunt in Kentucky, and my brother had gone to stay with a friend in town. It was around midnight, and I was in the living room watching TV when I heard the gravel crunch outside. Not just once, several steady, deliberate steps, like someone walking slow around the back of the house. I muted the TV and listened. The sound came again. Crunch, pause, crunch. I figured it was my brother, maybe trying to sneak in without waking me. I went to the window, pulled the curtain back and looked out, but there was nothing. Just the pale wash of the porch light and the thick tree line beyond it. I waited a minute longer, then called his name softly through the screen. No answer. The woods stayed perfectly still. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, but then I heard it again, this time from the far side of the house. Slow, careful footsteps dragging across the gravel, circling. My stomach dropped. I flicked on the back floodlight, but it barely reached beyond the steps. Nothing moved out there. That night, I locked every door and window. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe even a raccoon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been out there was moving with purpose, not aimlessly. The sound of it lingered in my head long after I crawled into bed. The next night, it happened again. Around the same time. The same measured steps, starting near the back door and moving around the house in a slow circle. It didn't sound heavy enough to be a person, but it didn't sound like an animal either. Too deliberate, too even. I turned off the lights and crept to my bedroom window, barely lifting the curtain. The yard was pitch black except for the thin glow of the porch light. For a moment, I saw something shift near the tree line, just a darker patch of darkness, like a shape that shouldn't have been there. I blinked, and it was gone. I barely slept that night. By the third night, I was exhausted and on edge. I called my brother, told him someone might be hanging around. He laughed it off, said maybe I was hearing my own echo off the trees. But he didn't come home either. That night, when the footsteps started, I tried something different. I grabbed Dad's old flashlight, opened the back door, and stepped onto the porch. The sound stopped immediately. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I shone the light into the yard, sweeping it across the gravel and into the woods. Nothing. No movement. No eyes reflecting back. I turned off the light and just listened. For a few seconds, there was nothing, and then, right from the edge of the trees came a faint crunch. Then another. Then another, slow and steady, like whoever or whatever it was knew I was listening. I backed inside and locked the door. After that, the night started to blur. I'd hear the steps almost every night, always around the same hour. Sometimes they came from the gravel, sometimes from the porch itself, like soft scuffing feet on the wood. A few times I heard the doorknob rattle. Once I thought I heard breathing just outside my window. I called the sheriff's department twice. The first time they came out, they found nothing. The second time, they didn't even bother to get out of the car. Said it was probably animals. Told me to buy motion lights and get a dog, so I did. The dog lasted 2 nights. She was a rescue mutt named Daisy, big and loud, the kind that barked at everything. The first night she slept fine. The second night I woke to her whining at the door, hackles raised, growling low. I heard the crunch of gravel again, this time closer than ever, maybe 10 feet from the porch. Daisy barked once, just once, then bolted under the bed and refused to come out. The next morning I found muddy prints on the porch leading right up to the back door. They weren't shoe prints exactly, but they weren't paw prints either. They were long, narrow, and uneven, like someone had been walking barefoot but dragging their feet. I thought about leaving then, but it was my family's house. I couldn't just abandon it because of some noises, so I stayed. The nights after that were worse. I started hearing whispering from outside, too low to make out words, but clear enough that it wasn't the wind. It always came from different parts of the yard, like it was circling, testing. Sometimes I'd wake up and the whispers would stop the moment my eyes opened. Once I looked out the window and saw it, something standing just beyond the light. It was tall and thin, its head slightly tilted like it was listening. I couldn't see its face, couldn't even tell if it had one. I just stood there staring until my vision blurred, and when I blinked, it was gone. I packed a bag and left the next morning. I stayed with a friend in town for a week. Nothing strange happened there. No footsteps, no whispers. I started to feel normal again, even laughed about it one night, saying maybe it was some local kids messing with me. But when I drove back home the following weekend to grab a few things, I knew it hadn't been kids. As I turned onto the gravel road, I noticed something strange. The trees along the drive were quiet, too quiet. Not a single bird, not even the usual hum of insects. When I pulled up to the house, the first thing I noticed was the back porch light flickering. It had burned steady for years, but now it pulsed on and off, like it couldn't decide whether to die or stay alive. I stepped out of the truck and immediately felt it. That same pressure in the air, that same awareness, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Inside, the house smelled damp and stale, like it hadn't been lived in for months instead of a week. I walked through each room, checking doors and windows. Everything was locked, but the silence felt wrong. Too thick, too still. When I got to my bedroom, I froze. The curtains were open. I never left them open. There were footprints again, faint this time, but visible on the wooden floor near the window. Muddy, narrow, dragging marks that led to the bed and back. I backed out of the room, heart pounding, and as I reached the living room, I heard it. The sound I'd dreaded more than anything, the slow, measured crunch of gravel outside. I turned toward the window, and there it was, a shape, darker than the trees behind it, standing at the edge of the yard. Even through the glass, I could feel it watching. My whole body went cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The shape didn't either. It just stood there, patient, unhurried, as if it knew I couldn't do anything but look. Then, slowly, it started walking toward the house. I ran. I grabbed my bag and sprinted out the front door, keys shaking in my hand. I didn't look back until I was halfway down the drive, but I swear I heard the gravel behind me, footsteps matching mine, never running, never rushing, just following. That was 2 years ago. I sold the house not long after. The new owners moved in last spring. I don't know if they've heard anything yet. I don't want to know. I've moved 3 times since then, different towns, different states. But every now and then when the night gets real quiet and the air feels heavy, I hear it again. Just faint at first, crunch, pause, crunch, always slow, always deliberate, and I know that wherever I go, it's still following, because it's not the house it's tied to. It's me, and every night, no matter where I sleep, the footsteps always find their way back. I'd never thought much about mirrors before. They were just part of the house, another surface to check if I looked halfway alive before heading to work. But over time, I started to realize how strange it is that mirrors don't just reflect what's in front of them. They reflect where you are not, what you can't see, what's behind you, and sometimes, I think they show more than they should. It started in the bathroom late one night. I'd been working long hours at the hardware store, barely sleeping, so I wasn't exactly at my best. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection in the small oval mirror above the sink, when I noticed movement behind me, a flicker, like someone had just stepped into the doorway. I turned around fast, toothbrush still in my mouth, but the hall behind me was empty. The light flickered once and steadied again. I shrugged it off, rinsed my mouth, and went to bed. The next night, the same thing happened. I saw a shape, just a blur, really, pass behind me in the mirror. I thought maybe it was my cat, but he was asleep in the bedroom. The third night, it wasn't movement I saw, but a shadow. My own reflection was fine, normal even. But just over my shoulder, the darkness seemed deeper than it should have been, like the hallway and the reflection stretched further back than the real one. I even turned around, pacing it out, counting the steps, 5 feet from the sink to the wall. But in the reflection, the hallway looked longer. I could almost see a door at the end of it that didn't exist in my house. For a while, I convinced myself it was stress. My mother had passed a few months before, and I wasn't sleeping right. Grief does strange things to your mind. That's what I told myself anyway. But then it started showing up in other places, not just the bathroom mirror. One morning, I was standing by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up over the ridge. The glass was fogged from my breath, and for a moment I saw a faint outline reflected beside me. A shoulder, a bit of a face, blurred but there. I turned so fast I spilled coffee on my hand, but no one was there. I remember my chest tightening, that old animal fear you feel when you know you're being watched. After that, I started noticing it in every reflective surface. The dark screen of my TV before it powered on. The window of my truck when I walked past it. Always the same. Someone standing just behind me, always out of focus, always gone when I turned around. I stopped turning on lights in the bathroom at night. Started avoiding mirrors altogether. But you can't really avoid reflections, not completely. They're everywhere. The night things got worse, it was raining. Hard. The power had gone out, and the only light in the house came from the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. I was standing in the kitchen, trying to find candles, when I saw something in the reflection of the glass cabinet. It wasn't me. It was facing me, but its head was tilted at a strange angle, like it was studying me. Lightning flashed again, and for half a second, its mouth moved. Just a twitch, a hint of a smile, then darkness. I didn't move for a long time. When the power came back, everything looked normal again. But from that night on, I could feel it, even when I couldn't see it, like a weight in the air around me. I told a friend about it over the phone, just to get it out. He said it was probably stress or sleep deprivation. He even joked that I should cover my mirrors if they freaked me out that much. So that's what I did. Every mirror in the house, covered. Towels, blankets, even newspaper taped up over the glass. It made the place look insane, but I slept a little better that way. For about a week. Then one morning, I woke up and found the coverings gone. Every single one of them. The bathroom mirror was bare again. I know I didn't take them down. I know it. I stood there in the doorway staring at my own reflection, waiting for something to move. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the toothbrush. That's when I noticed the reflection wasn't quite right. My reflection's hand, the one holding the toothbrush, was a second slower than mine. I froze. I lifted my other hand slowly, testing it. My reflection followed, but again, just a heartbeat late. It was subtle but unmistakable. I should have run right then, but I couldn't. I just stood there, trapped between the instinct to move and the terror of what might happen if I did. Then, my reflection smiled. It wasn't a big grin, just a small, knowing curve at the edge of its mouth. But I hadn't smiled. I dropped the toothbrush, stumbled backward, and the reflection stayed where it was for half a second longer than it should have before snapping back to mirror me again. I left the bathroom and slammed the door. For days, I avoided that room entirely. I'd wash up at the kitchen sink, sleep on the couch. But even then, I'd catch glimpses of it, in the TV screen, in the dark window over the sink at night. The same faint outline, closer every time. I thought maybe if I left the house, it would stop. I packed a bag and drove to my cousin's place in Fayetteville. Told him I just needed to get away for a while. He laughed, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had, but for the first night there, nothing happened. No reflections, no movement. I actually slept through the night. Then the second night, I woke up to the sound of running water. I went into the guest bathroom and the sink was on full blast. The mirror above it was fogged with steam, even though the water was cold. I wiped it with my hand, and for just a second I saw my own reflection. Only the eyes weren't right. They were looking past me, not at me. I turned around, and there it was again, faintly visible in the dark shower glass. The shape of a person, standing still, watching. I ran out of the room and didn't go back in. My cousin found me on the porch an hour later, shaking. I told him everything. He looked at me the way people do when they want to believe you but can't. He let me stay one more night. Then politely told me I probably needed rest, maybe even to see someone. So I went home. The house felt different when I got back. Lighter somehow, like whatever had been in it was gone. For 2 whole days, nothing happened. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it all. But on the 3rd morning when I woke up, the first thing I saw was the mirror across the room. I was lying on my side, half asleep, and my reflection was already sitting up. It was looking right at me. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I didn't move. It didn't move either, not at first. Then, as I sat up slowly, it smiled again, that same small, impossible smile. And this time, its mouth moved. I didn't hear words, but I saw them form. It said, "I've been here." I don't remember what happened next. I must have passed out because when I came to, the room was bright and quiet. The mirror was normal again. But I knew then that it wasn't gone. Since that morning, I've started seeing it everywhere again. Not clearly, but enough to know it's still around. Sometimes, when I pass by a window at night, my reflection lingers just a second too long after I've walked away. Sometimes, it moves when I don't. I've thought about breaking every mirror in the house, but I'm afraid that won't help. I think it's not the mirrors themselves. It's me. It's like the reflection has learned me step by step, until it doesn't need the glass anymore. Lately, when I'm half asleep, I can feel something watching me from the corner of the room. Not close, but near enough that I know if I opened my eyes, I'd see it standing there. I've stopped looking at my reflection entirely now. I avoid windows after dark, turn off the TV before it can go black. But sometimes, when I forget and catch a glimpse of myself in the toaster, or the microwave, or even a puddle on the floor, I notice the same thing, a faint, impossible smile forming where mine should be. And I know, with a cold certainty I can't explain, that whatever's looking back isn't just a reflection anymore. It's waiting for me to turn away.